Welcome to this explainer. You know, from the time we're literally toddlers, society drills a strict set of rules into our heads about who we're actually allowed to be. We're told, hey, tone down that ambition, stop being so intense, or don't be selfish, all just to stay polite and acceptable. But what if I told you that reclaiming those exact dark traits, the ones you've been desperately trying to hide, actually unlocks a fierce, rock-solid, boundaried authenticity? Reclaiming these cut-off parts of yourself, it's the absolute key to becoming whole, self-sovereign, and honestly impossible to manipulate. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. We spend, well, pretty much our whole lives conditioned to think that certain parts of us, our anger, our deep selfishness, our jealousy, those really intense ambitions, are just inherently bad. We're told they have to be managed, numbed, or completely wiped out if we want anyone to love or accept us. But here's the reality. Trying to perfectly micromanage and suppress your own human nature is a complete trap, and it leads straight to total, utter exhaustion. Just think about the exhausting things we constantly do that we mistake for being a good person. You know the drill: biting your tongue in a conversation so you don't seem judgmental, saying yes to a million favors you absolutely do not want to do just because saying no feels way too selfish, or literally just pasting a smile on your face through situations that make you feel deeply frustrated or completely disrespected. We silence the parts of ourselves that are inconvenient for other people to deal with, and then we just convince ourselves, well, I guess this is what it means to be a good person. Let's move to the next concept and see how this builds into an entire psychological identity. The legendary psychologist Carl Jung actually had a specific term for this exhausting performance. He called it the persona. Basically, it's a mask. It's this carefully constructed, highly curated identity you strap on every single morning before you walk out the front door, and its entire job is just to earn approval, avoid rejection, and make everybody around you comfortable enough to keep you around. But this whole performance, it's driven entirely by this deep underlying terror that if people saw who you actually are, they'd decide you just aren't worth keeping.
So I want to pause right here and ask you to really reflect on your daily life for a second. Think about that heavy, chronic fatigue you feel at the end of the day. How much of that is actual physical tiredness, and how much is just the grinding, invisible labor of constantly performing goodness just to keep the peace? Seriously, tell me in the comments below. Because if you're being drained by your own polite compliance, you really need to understand the psychological war you are currently fighting against yourself.
Which brings us to a much more turbulent reality. Section 2, the rising shadow. The invisible director. See, the massive danger with this whole good person performance is that your unacceptable bad traits, they don't just magically disappear because you refuse to look at them. When we shove our natural qualities out of our conscious mind, they don't vanish. They go somewhere else. And the fallout from that is huge. Jung called this buried collection of rejected traits the shadow. Think of it like a locked, dark room right inside your mind where you toss everything society said was improper. But here is the warning. When you repress your shadow, it doesn't just sit in there quietly collecting dust. It actually starts to secretly control you from the unconscious. It becomes this invisible director, literally pulling the strings of your life from the dark.
And this brings us to one of Jung's absolute most famous and frankly chilling warnings. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You might genuinely think you're making rational, logical choices every single day. But those unacknowledged shadow forces, they operate like invisible Russian currents beneath a boat at night. They silently pull your life into these repetitive patterns of self-sabotage, uncontrollable emotional outbursts, or just this heavy, unexplainable emptiness, even when you think you're doing everything right.
On top of that, repressing your darkness deeply distorts how you view everyone else around you. It happens through this wild mechanism called projection. Projection is when we intensely, aggressively criticize a trait in someone else. But the only reason it triggers us so severely is because that exact same trait is buried deeply within us. The things we intensely despise in other people are, very frequently, exactly what we are absolutely terrified to own in ourselves. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how projection functions in our everyday lives. For example, when you criticize a coworker with this unusual, disproportionate rage for being selfish or manipulative, you know what's usually happening? You're actually projecting your own completely disowned desires for power, ambition, or boundaries right onto them. Your intense judgment of them is really just a form of self-oppression. It's a total rejection of a part of yourself that you're just too scared to look at. Which leads us to the absolute irony of our modern culture. We live in a society that has turned personal growth into like a permanent state of emergency. We're constantly being sold another habit to build, another 5 a.m. morning routine, or another healing crystal to buy. But Jung believed that most of this endless, exhausting self-improvement is actually just another form of shadow rejection. It's just the ego frantically trying to fix itself into something more acceptable. Honestly, if your spiritual awakening feels like a warm, relaxing bath, you aren't waking up. You're just taking a nap.
So, how do we actually wake up? Well, we have to enter the next phase, Section 3, the sacred fire, and the pursuit of psychological wholeness. If you are truly serious about your psychological evolution, you have to undergo the grueling, demanding process of shadow integration. We have to stop using self-improvement to run away from our darkness, and instead pivot to the real solution, creating true psychological wholeness. Jung gave us this terrifying but incredibly liberating formula for this. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You can't just slap a good vibes only sticker on your life. Genuine psychological evolution demands that you drag your most rejected, suppressed parts into the full, unblinking light of conscious awareness.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive paradigm shift it offers. When you finally stop rejecting your bad traits, you realize something huge. The shadow doesn't just hold darkness or evil things. It actually holds the most vital, alive, authentic, and powerful parts of you. It holds the exact energies that society trained you to hide because they made you too loud, too intense, or just too difficult to control.
Let's actually walk through how this transformation happens, using a really dark trait like anger as an example. When anger is repressed, it acts as this toxic poison, or it builds into a destructive explosion. But through conscious integration, when you actually acknowledge it, it transforms. It becomes what Jungian psychology recognizes as a sacred fire. It completely stops controlling you. Instead, it serves your evolution. It acts as the fuel that burns away relationships that no longer serve you, and it destroys those outdated agreements you made back when you valued yourself a lot less.
So, this brings us to the ultimate test of your psychological sovereignty. I want you to look right into your own darkness for a second. What is the one messy, unacceptable, or super intense part of your personality that you have spent your entire life apologizing for or trying to hide? I want you to name it in the comments below, right now. Seriously, because publicly claiming that shadow trait is the very first, most vital step to taking your power back from the people who told you it was wrong in the first place. When you finally stop exhausting yourself, trying to eliminate your inner paradoxes, you make a genuine, lasting peace with your own contradictions. You drop the exhausting performance. You stop trying to be simply good, and you decide instead that it is vastly more important to become whole, to become real. Because a truly whole human being, they aren't just a one-dimensional good person. A whole person completely embraces paradox. They have access to their full, absolute range of human capacity. They can be incredibly gentle, but also fiercely protective. They can be wildly generous while maintaining totally impenetrable boundaries. They can be deeply compassionate and yet completely ruthless, depending entirely on what the reality of the situation actually demands of them. So the crucial point is understanding this ultimate goal, individuation. This is the process of embracing your so-called bad traits and integrating the shadow to step into the power of a whole human being. It means you stop apologizing for the intensity of your soul. You stop calling your protective instincts or your righteous anger a malfunction, and you finally allow yourself to be a complete, unfiltered human. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to carry with you today. Are you going to continue the exhausting daily performance of the good person just to keep everyone else around you comfortable? Or will you finally have the fierce, uncompromising courage to embrace your shadow, leave behind the mask, and claim your untouchable power? The choice is entirely yours. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.